Hey, this is Joe, and we're back with the 2014 GSXR 750. I have the engine and frame supported by engine hoist, and I have a jack to stabilize the engine and frame underneath the engine. I've taken the rear shock, put it through the bracket, and put a nut on the bracket of the frame to stabilize the shock. We have the swing arm pivot bolt, and I'm going to get over here and lift up on the front of the swing arm, and we're going to insert that pivot bolt through the frame to mount the swing arm. And then we can go through, and underneath there's a bracket there from the rear shock that will bolt into the rear of the frame. So we're going to lift the swing arm, and we're going to put that pivot bolt in, and that support bracket in from the rear shock, mount it to the frame. Now I'm going to take this swing arm and try to pivot it up. And we'll slide the pivot bolt in. And on the right hand side of the pivot bolt, it screws in. Now that we have that, we can take the lower bracket and we can insert the shock bracket underneath. You probably can't see that there. It's a bracket on the frame. We've inserted the bolt. Now we can put the nut on, and then we can start tightening the pivot bolt. But now the swing arm has been mounted onto the frame. I'm going to go on the other side, and I'm going to put the nut onto the shock bracket bolt, and then we'll come back and start tightening up the pivot bolt. On the pivot bolt, there is a hex fitting, and we have a 19mm hex socket. And this is a 1/2-inch drive. So now what we can do is we can then tighten that pivot bolt into the frame. We now have that pivot bolt tightened and just snugged up. And then on the other side, there is a nut. So we'll go over on the other side and install the nut. We're now going to slide the right fork up into the tree clamp. And then we're just going to snug this just enough to hold it. Now I have to put the clip-on onto the top. We can then loosen it and then put it into the top portion of the tree clamp. When you mount the clip-on, you want to put this tab facing upwards because it slides into the top tree clamp. Now that we have the clip-on on, we can now loosen the bolt on the lower tree, and then we can slide the fork tube up into the top tree clamp. And what we want at the top, we want 5 millimeters of the fork tube sticking up through the clamp. We'll just snug that on because we're going to have to adjust and center the forks once we get everything mounted. And you want to make sure that tab goes up into the top tree clamp. We can now take the left fork or the right fork Now we can mount the clip-on on the right fork. Again, you want the tab facing upward. We can now slide the fork the rest of the way. And again, you want about 5 millimeters above the top of the clamp. And then we can check for the clearance of the right clip-on to make sure we have enough clearance on both sides. We can now take the bolts for the clip-ons this socket right here is a 12 millimeter, and the clip-on bolts are a 6 millimeter Allen wrench. For the time being, we're just going to snug these up. Later we're going to go back through and torque everything up. And then we can come in, put the bolt on the top of the top tree clamp, and we can torque that down as well. Let's go ahead and put the washer and the bolt there. We can now put the washer on, and there's an aluminum nut. We can take and put that on there. Now we're ready to torque all of the bolts on the forks and the tree clamps. We're going to start torquing the front fork and tree clamp bolts. The first one we're going to torque is the top tree clamp bolt. I'm using the Quinn digital torque adapter. You can pick these up at Harbor Freight. The 1/2 inch one is $50. The 3/8 inch version is around $30 some. So we're going to put this on. Move the camera up a bit here so you can see the torque reading increases. When you get within 20%, you get some temporary beeps. When you get up to 35, you get a solid beep. I really like this digital torque adapter. It's very nice. So we got the top tree clamp. Now we can work our way down and get the rest of the bolts on the forks. I've switched to the 3/8 drive Quinn digital torque adapter, and we have the 12mm socket. We can now torque these to 23 Newton meters. We got the right hand two torqued to 23. Now we'll finish up on the left two. Now we can torque the top clip-on bolt and the top tree bolt. These are also at 23 Newton meters.